The poor pregnant woman no one wanted to help bought an old hut. Seconds later, her life changed forever. Monique knelt on the dusty floor of the hut, her breath uneven, her belly round beneath her torn sweater. The air was cold and thick with the smell of wood rot. She had only come here for shelter, one night away from the rain, but her trembling hands now clutched something far more shocking than she could understand. Beneath the cracked floorboards, a rusted metal box had caught her eye. Using a broken knife, she forced it open, the sound echoing through the empty cabin. Inside, layers of yellowed paper and small velvet bags glimmered faintly in the fading light. Her heart pounded as she reached in, her fingertips brushing against something solid, something valuable. Tears filled her eyes as she stared down, whispering, "This can't be real." For the first time in months, she felt hope. But how did a woman everyone ignored, homeless, hungry, 7 months pregnant, end up finding this box in a forgotten hut deep in the Kentucky mountains? And what exactly was inside that would turn her entire life around within seconds? Before we learn how Monique's story began, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and make sure to hit subscribe for more life-changing stories like this one. Now come with us as we take you how the Monique story began. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the air every morning at the small diner near Old Louisville where Monique worked the early shift. She wore the same faded blue uniform each day, tying her apron tightly over her growing belly to hide it as best she could. Customers liked her smile and her calm voice, but lately she could feel their eyes drift toward her stomach. The manager, Mr. Hughes, had already reduced her hours, claiming business was slow. Deep down, she knew what it really meant. A pregnant waitress was bad for the image. Monique had once believed things would turn around. Her boyfriend, Darren, promised to stay with her when she first told him about the baby. He'd said he was ready to step up. But by the time her stomach began to show, his calls stopped. One afternoon, she came home from work to find his clothes gone, the key he always used lying on the kitchen counter. No note. No goodbye. Just silence. That was the day she realized she was on her own. Bills started piling up like dirty dishes. The landlord stopped being polite. She tried to pick up more shifts, but the diner let her go 2 weeks later, saying she needed time to rest. Rest from what? She wondered, when rent was due and her savings were down to almost nothing. She filled out job applications at every shop and fast food place on 4th Street. Most of them smiled politely and said they'd call. None of them ever did. Her belly made it clear she wouldn't last long on her feet, and no one wanted that risk. She spent her days walking the city with a folder of resumes, her feet swollen, her back aching. At night she sat on a park bench near the Ohio River, watching the lights reflect on the water. She'd count the money left in her bag, 20 here, 40 there, and try to stretch it for food and gas. When her landlord finally changed the locks, she moved everything she owned into her old sedan, a dull red Chevy that rattled whenever she started it. October came colder than she expected. The nights near Waterfront Park turned sharp, the air biting through her thin jacket. She parked close to the river so the sound of moving water could drown out her thoughts. The city felt different after midnight. The laughter from nearby bars faded, replaced by the hum of streetlights and the occasional siren in the distance. She kept a small blanket over her stomach, whispering to the baby that everything would be okay, even though she wasn't sure it was true. Each morning, she cleaned herself up in the public restroom, tying her hair back, brushing her teeth at the sink while trying not to meet anyone's eyes. She'd buy a cup of coffee from the gas station nearby just to stay inside a few minutes longer. Her reflection in the window looked tired, eyes puffy, lips cracked, the glow of pregnancy mixed with exhaustion and hunger. She thought about calling her mother in Mississippi, but pride stopped her. They hadn't spoken in years. Her mother had warned her about Darren, had begged her not to leave home. Monique had left anyway, chasing a dream of independence. Now, Reaching for her phone in the dark, she couldn't bring herself to dial. The shame was heavier than the cold. Some nights, she'd wake up to the sound of someone tapping on a car window nearby, maybe another person sleeping rough being told to move along. Once, she saw police lights flashing behind her rearview mirror and froze, holding her breath until the car passed. Fear had become part of her routine, a quiet companion that never left. One morning, she tried again. Went to a hotel on Broadway that needed a front desk clerk. The manager looked at her resume and then at her stomach. "You're expecting?" he asked. When she nodded, he sighed. "I'm sorry. The position's already been filled." He hadn't even looked at the rest of the page. She thanked him anyway and walked out before the tears came. Her savings vanished quicker than she could believe. Gas, food, a few nights at a cheap motel when she couldn't stand the cold, all of it gone in weeks. She sold her old TV for $50 and her phone for a little more, keeping only a used one that could connect to public Wi-Fi. Every dollar counted. Every night felt longer than the last. By late October, her ankles were swollen, and every step sent pain up her legs. She could feel the baby move more often, small kicks reminding her of why she couldn't give up. But hope was thinning. The world around her carried on, people hurrying to work, couples laughing outside cafes, while she existed in between, invisible. The worst part wasn't hunger or fear, it was being ignored. She had tried to hold her head high, but no one wanted to look at her, a pregnant woman sleeping in a car by the river. Her voice had grown small. Her prayers shorter. Sometimes she'd whisper to the baby, "I'll find us a home soon," just to keep herself believing. One evening, as the wind picked up and rain began to fall, she wrapped her blanket tighter and started the engine for warmth. The sound of the river mixed with the hum of the motor, steady and low. She thought of the diner, of the laughter, of how life used to feel before everything slipped away. She didn't know it yet, but that night marked the end of the life she'd known, and the beginning of the strange path that would lead her to the mountains of Kentucky and the old hut waiting there, hidden in the trees. By the first week of November, Monique had stopped counting the number of doors that closed in her face. She had tried everything: churches, food banks, local charities, any place that might take in a pregnant woman. Each time, she left with the same answer: "We're full. We're out of funds. Try again next month." At one church near Broadway, the woman behind the desk smiled sadly and handed her a small brown paper bag with a sandwich inside. "We wish we could do more," she said. Monique thanked her and walked away before the tears could fall. The sandwich was gone before she reached her car. At the downtown shelter, the man at the counter shook his head before she could even finish her sentence. "We don't take single pregnant women. Liability," he said flatly, already turning to the next person in line. Another door closed. Another night in the car. The city felt colder, harder. The kindness she used to believe existed seemed far away now. Even the people who smiled at her did so with pity. She began spending afternoons inside the public library on 4th Street, where the warmth and quiet gave her a few hours of peace. She'd sit at one of the old computers, scrolling through listings for jobs and housing, her stomach tight beneath her coat. Her last $200 sat folded in her wallet like a secret. It had to stretch until something, anything, changed. But nothing did. Every rental listing asked for deposits she couldn't afford. Every job posting came with rules she couldn't meet. The world moved fast while she stood still. That afternoon, as the wind howled outside, she clicked through another housing site she hadn't seen before. Most of the listings were ordinary: trailers, old apartments, land for sale. But one headline caught her eye: "Off-grid cabin, $200. Must pick up keys in Harlan County." She frowned. It sounded like a scam. Still, curiosity pushed her to open it. The photos were few: one blurry shot of a small wooden hut surrounded by trees, another of a dirt path. The description was short and strange: old property, remote, needs work. No utilities. Cash only. Monique stared at the screen for a long time. Her heart beat faster. The price was so low it made no sense. $200. That was all she had left. She tried to reason with herself. It could be fake, or dangerous, or both. But it could also be real. Maybe, somehow, this was a chance to start over. She whispered softly, "It's crazy." Yet the thought didn't leave. She searched Harlan County on the map, far from the city, deep in the mountains. A place she'd never been. A place no one would look for her. The idea both scared and comforted her. When the library lights flickered to signal closing time, she printed the listing and tucked it into her bag. That night, she couldn't sleep. The baby kicked softly, as if reminding her there wasn't much time left. The car heater barely worked, and frost covered the windows. She kept thinking of that cabin, the roof, the trees, the quiet. By morning, her decision was forming in silence. She went to the same gas station she always did, bought a coffee, and asked to use the phone. The number from the ad rang several times before a voice answered. A man, older, with a thick Kentucky accent. "Cabin's still up for sale," he said. "Ain't much to look at, but it's dry." She hesitated. "Is it safe?" "As safe as any place out there," he replied. "Just need someone not afraid of hard work." She didn't tell him about the baby or her situation. She just asked where to meet. He gave her directions to a truck stop outside Lexington and said he'd take her the rest of the way after payment. After hanging up, she stared at the phone, her hands shaking. She still had time to change her mind. $200 wasn't much, but it was everything she had left in the world. Yet something about his tone, steady, almost kind, made her believe him. Later that day, she packed what little she owned into an old duffel bag: 2 shirts, a sweater, a small blanket, and the printed listing. Before leaving Louisville, she stopped by a church once more. This time, she didn't ask for help. She just sat in the pews for a few minutes, whispering a prayer she hadn't said in years. The drive to the truck stop took hours. Her car groaned the entire way, threatening to die with every hill. When she arrived, the sun was setting. The lot was mostly empty except for a few trucks and the faint smell of diesel in the air. She sat for a long moment, scared to go inside. Finally, she opened the door and stepped into the diner attached to the stop. Inside, an elderly couple sat near the window, white hair, matching flannel jackets, hands wrapped around steaming mugs. The woman noticed Monique first. Her eyes softened when she saw the belly. "You okay, dear?" she asked. Monique hesitated, then nodded weakly. "Just passing through." "You look frozen," the man said. "Sit down, have some tea." Something in his voice reminded her of her grandfather. She sat with them, hands trembling as she wrapped them around the warm cup the waitress brought. They asked simple questions: where she was headed, if she had family nearby. Monique gave short answers, embarrassed to admit the truth. When she mentioned Harlan County, the couple exchanged a look. "That's a long drive for someone alone," the woman said. "I'll be fine," Monique replied softly. But the man shook his head. "No one should make that trip alone. Not this late. We're headed that way ourselves, visiting our daughter. We can give you a lift." Monique's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't want to be a burden. But their kindness felt genuine, like something she hadn't seen in months. After a moment, she whispered, "Thank you." That night, for the first time in a long while, she didn't sleep in her car. The couple let her rest in the back seat of their truck while they stopped at a motel nearby. As she drifted off, she thought about how strange it was that help could appear from nowhere, just when she'd given up on it. In the morning, They would drive her toward the mountains, and the road ahead would change everything. The next morning, the fog hung low over the highway as the elderly couple's pickup rolled out of the truck stop parking lot. The air smelled of rain and pine, and the road stretched endlessly ahead. Monique sat quietly in the back seat, her hands resting on her stomach. The woman, Mrs. Tate, turned around once in a while to ask if she was comfortable, offering her biscuits and bottled water. Monique smiled faintly each time but mostly stared out the window, watching the buildings grow fewer and the trees grow thicker. By the time they reached the edge of Lexington, the roads had narrowed. Civilization began to fade, the gas stations became rarer, the billboards disappeared, and the cell signal flickered away. Every mile felt like a step further from the life she'd known. Yet, instead of fear, a strange calm settled in her chest. There was nothing left to lose. Only a chance that this mysterious place might offer a new start. Mrs. Tate pointed at the passing hills. "That's coal country," she said softly. "Used to be plenty of life here. Now it's mostly quiet. Too quiet, some folks say." Her husband chuckled under his breath. "Quiet's not always bad," he said. "But folks around here got stories about old mines, people disappearing, things best left alone." Monique didn't ask what he meant. She didn't want stories. She wanted shelter. By noon, they stopped at a small diner near Hazard, Kentucky, where the Tates insisted she eat a warm meal before continuing. They handed her a sandwich and hugged her goodbye, pressing a folded note with their phone number into her hand. "If you ever need a ride back," Mrs. Tate said, "you call us, you hear?" Monique nodded, tears burning in her eyes. She watched them drive away, their taillights fading into the mist. For the first time, she felt completely alone, but somehow, it didn't scare her. It felt like a clean slate. She followed the directions the man had given her. The road leading toward Harlan County was steep and winding, flanked by tall pines and jagged cliffs. Every turn seemed to tighten, the air colder, thinner. Her car rattled loudly, warning that it might not last much longer. When she finally saw the dirt turnoff from Highway 421, she almost missed it, a narrow, hidden path marked only by a wooden post leaning sideways. A truck was parked near the turnoff, and beside it stood a tall man in overalls, a weathered hat shielding his face. As she pulled up, he waved. "You must be Monique," he said, voice rough but kind. "Name's Carter. You're a brave one, coming all this way." She stepped out, stretching her stiff legs. "I had to see it for myself," she said. Carter studied her quietly, his eyes drifting to her stomach. "You expecting?" She nodded. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't mean to talk you out of it, but that place ain't fit for no one, especially not someone in your condition. Roofs caving in. Woods out there get strange after dark." "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said simply. The man looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I figured you'd say that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring of keys. "It's yours for what you paid. Just be careful. Folks around here don't go near those woods at night." They exchanged cash and paperwork beside the truck. He offered to lead her the rest of the way since the path was too rough for her car. Monique grabbed her duffel and followed him on foot through the overgrown trail. The forest closed in quickly, swallowing the sound of the highway behind them. Fallen branches cracked underfoot. Thick vines wrapped around rusted pieces of machinery, remnants of old mining days long gone. "Used to be a mine not far from here," Carter said, pointing to a broken shaft entrance half hidden by brush. "Shut down after a collapse back in the 70s. Some say they never found all the men who went down." Monique said nothing, her breath visible in the cold air. She kept her eyes forward, focused on the faint outline of a roof through the trees. When they reached the clearing, her heart sank. The cabin looked worse than in the pictures, tilted to one side, the roof sagging like a broken spine. The wood was dark and swollen from years of rain, moss creeping up the walls. A shattered window hung open, its glass scattered on the ground. The door leaned against its hinges as if it could fall off any moment. "This is it," Carter said, voice low. "She's been empty a long time." Monique stood silently, clutching her bag. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment it sounded like whispers. The forest was dense and unmoving, as if it were holding its breath. "Locals say these woods got stories," Carter added after a pause. "Missing miners. People who came here and never left. But you'll be fine if you keep your light on and stay inside after sunset." Monique's fingers tightened around the keys. "I'll manage," she said quietly. He frowned. "If you change your mind, my farm's a few miles back. There's always a spare room." She thanked him, though she knew she wouldn't leave. Something in her chest told her she was meant to be here, like this place had been waiting. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the forest began to change. The air turned heavy, shadows stretching longer across the clearing. Somewhere deep among the trees came a low groan, like metal bending or wood creaking under pressure. Carter shifted uneasily. "That's my cue to go," he muttered. "You take care now." She watched him disappear down the path until his figure vanished completely. The silence that followed was sharp and alive. The sound of the wind returned, carrying faint echoes, maybe branches, maybe footsteps. Standing before the leaning cabin, Monique hesitated only once. She took a deep breath, stepped across the threshold, and closed the door behind her. The floor groaned beneath her feet. Dust floated through a narrow beam of light from a hole in the roof. Her heart pounded, but there was no turning back. Whatever waited inside, whatever secrets these woods held, were now part of her story. The sound of Carter's truck faded down the dirt path until it was swallowed by the forest. For a long moment, Monique stood at the window, her fingers gripping the edge of the cracked sill, watching the last trace of daylight vanish between the trees. The stillness that followed was deep, heavy, and absolute. There were no city sounds here, no traffic, no sirens, no distant hum of life. Only the wind moving through the branches like a long, slow sigh. She shut the door carefully, its hinges groaning under the weight. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and earth. Dust floated through the fading light that slipped through the hole in the roof. Her footsteps echoed softly across the uneven floorboards as she explored the single room. There was a small wood stove in one corner, rusted and useless. A broken chair leaned against the wall, and a few old tools, picks, shovels, and ropes, hung from nails, their metal surfaces dull with rust. She set her bag down and tried to steady her breathing. Every sound seemed louder here. The wind brushing against the boards, the faint creak of the roof, her own heartbeat thudding in her chest. She told herself she wasn't afraid, but her voice trembled even in her thoughts. As darkness fell, the forest came alive. Branches scraped against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a low call echoed, animal or something else, she couldn't tell. She wrapped her blanket around her shoulders and sat near the wall, keeping her flashlight close. The beam flickered weakly, its light bouncing off the mining tools, turning them into long, crooked shapes that shifted with every gust of wind. At first, she tried to keep herself busy, arranging her few belongings, setting up a place to rest, but her hands shook too much to focus. A sudden thump came from the porch. She froze. The sound was soft but real, followed by another, heavier step. Her throat tightened. "Hello," she whispered. No answer. Only the wind. She forced herself to peek through the broken window, her breath fogging the glass. The porch was empty. No movement. No one there. She stayed still for several minutes, her pulse quick and sharp. Maybe it was just a raccoon, she told herself. Maybe the boards were shifting from the cold. But the feeling in her stomach said otherwise. Another sound, this time from behind her. The floor creaked near the stove, slow and deliberate, as if someone had stepped inside. Monique spun around, flashlight trembling in her hand. The beam caught nothing but dust. Her knees went weak, and she sank to the floor, clutching her stomach. "Please," she whispered, "not now." The baby moved beneath her hand, a small reminder that she couldn't let fear take over. She closed her eyes and tried to calm herself, counting her breaths. But even with her eyes shut, she could feel it, the weight of the darkness around her, pressing in, the sense that something was just out of sight. Hours passed slowly. The wind rose, pushing through the cracks in the walls, making the cabin whisper with strange, uneven tones. It sounded almost like voices, soft, broken murmurs carried through the air. Each time she thought it was gone, it came back, low and faint, as if from under the floor. She moved closer to the corner, huddling against the wall, wrapping her blanket tight. Sleep wouldn't come. Every creak, every sigh of the building kept her alert. The flashlight had begun to fade, its circle of light shrinking until it was barely more than a glow. She tried to remind herself of what Carter said, that the stories were just old talk, things people said to scare outsiders. But when she glanced toward the tools hanging by the wall, she noticed something strange. The smallest pickaxe was swaying gently. There was no draft, no reason for it to move. Her breath caught. "Stop it," she whispered to herself. "It's just the wind." But the cabin didn't listen. A sharp crack came from beneath her, like a plank splitting under weight. She shone the flashlight downward. One of the boards near her feet had shifted slightly, leaving a thin gap where there shouldn't be one. The sound seemed to come from there. Monique hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. The noise returned, a soft tapping beneath the floor, rhythmic, almost deliberate. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. She crawled closer, running her fingers along the edge of the loose board. It looked different from the others. Newer, maybe replaced at some point. She pressed her palm against it, and it moved slightly, just enough to lift. Something had been hidden here. Her flashlight flickered again, nearly dying. She whispered, "Please, not now," and shook it until the light steadied. Slowly, she wedged her fingers under the plank and pulled. The wood lifted with a dry crack, revealing a narrow space beneath. The air that rose from below was cold and dry, untouched for years. She leaned closer, trying to see inside. At first, she thought it was empty, just dirt and dust, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw the outline of a small metal box resting in the darkness. For a long moment, she didn't move. The forest outside had gone silent, as if waiting. Even the wind had stopped. She reached down, her hand trembling, and touched the cool edge of the box. It was heavier than she expected, its surface covered in rust. Monique lifted it slowly onto the floor, staring at it under the faint glow of the flashlight. Her breath quickened. Her fear faded into something else, something sharper, closer to disbelief. Whatever was inside, it had been hidden for a reason. And though she didn't know it yet, what she was about to uncover beneath that floor would change the course of her life forever. Monique's hands shook as she pried the loose floorboard wider, the dim lantern light flickering against the worn wood. Her heart pounded with a rhythm that echoed through the silent cabin. Beneath the plank lay a rusted metal box, coated in decades of dust and cobwebs. She hesitated, whispering a quiet prayer before sliding it out. The metal felt colder than ice against her palms. For a long moment, she stared at it, afraid to open it, afraid of what it might mean. Everything that had happened, the terrifying night, the isolation, the endless rejection, had led her to this point. Her breath hitched as she wedged her pocketknife beneath the latch. The box creaked open with a slow groan that made her shiver. Inside, layered in yellowed cloth, were stacks of old bills, some so fragile they nearly fell apart as she lifted them. Beneath them, several small gold coins gleamed through the dust. She gasped, clutching her chest. Her knees weakened until she sat flat on the floor. For a few seconds, she couldn't breathe. The flickering light reflected off the coins like tiny suns, each one whispering of a life she could finally live. Rent. Food. Safety for her unborn child. But when her trembling fingers brushed against an envelope tucked into the corner of the box, everything shifted. The envelope was brittle, the handwriting uneven and fading. She unfolded it carefully, her pulse quickening with every line she read. March 17, 1942, the letter began. If you are reading this, I am likely gone. My name is Harold Dunn. I worked in the mines my whole life and trusted the wrong people. When the depression came, I lost everything but what I hid here. I never married, never had children, and I'm too old now to start again. This money is all that's left of me. If someone finds it, may it bring you what life denied me, peace. Monique's hand went to her mouth. Tears blurred the ink as she read the last sentence. Please, if you use this, remember I once lived here, alone, and that kindness still matters, even when no one sees it. She lowered the letter, staring into the shadows around her. The cabin creaked, as if responding to her discovery. For the first time, she didn't feel alone, but not in a comforting way. It was as though the air had thickened, aware of her presence, aware that the secret had been uncovered. The sound of wind sliding through the gaps in the walls carried a low murmur, almost like a sigh. She froze. Her eyes darted to the door. Nothing moved, but her skin prickled. Was she hearing the wind, or something else? A chill ran down her spine as she realized she was sitting where the man might have died, clutching his final hope. She whispered, "Thank you," her voice trembling. "I'll make this count." The lantern flickered violently. For a second, she thought she saw movement, a faint shift in the corner, near the old miner's coat hanging from a nail. Her throat tightened. She forced herself to breathe slowly, reminding herself she was exhausted and scared. But deep inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still watching. When the light steadied again, she looked back into the box. The money, the gold, the letter, it didn't feel like greed or luck. It felt like she had been chosen, like life itself had handed her a second chance wrapped in tragedy. She gathered the items with care, folding the letter back into the envelope, placing it on top of the cloth as if returning it to its rightful place. Her fear began to give way to a quiet resolve. Whatever this was, it wasn't only about survival anymore, it was about purpose. She sealed the box again and slid it beneath the floor, whispering, "I'll take care of it. I promise." The room grew still. The air felt lighter, calmer. She couldn't explain why, but it felt like her words had been heard. When she lay down that night, she didn't sleep much. Every sound still startled her, but something in her heart had changed. The hopeless woman who had arrived here was gone. In her place was someone who carried both grief and gratitude, someone ready to rebuild. Morning light spilled through the broken roof, soft and golden. Dust drifted like slow snowflakes through the beam of sunlight falling across the floorboards. Monique sat up, pressing a hand to her belly as her baby kicked for the first time in hours. She smiled faintly. The fear of the night before had softened into a strange calm. The cabin that had once felt cursed now looked different. The box under the floor wasn't just a discovery. It was a lifeline, a story of pain turned into mercy, and somehow she had become part of it. She took one last look around before gathering her few belongings. "We're going to make this right," she said softly to her unborn child. "We're going to start over." Outside, the mountains stood tall and silent, their slopes washed in morning mist. As she walked away from the cabin, she felt its weight in her heart, The pain of the man who had left behind both his fortune and his loneliness, and the strange peace that now lingered where fear once lived. What she didn't know was that this discovery would not just change her life, it would rebuild it from the ground up. The morning light changed everything. What had been shadows and fear the night before now appeared only as dust and quiet age. The cabin looked smaller, less threatening, almost tired. Monique stood in the doorway with her backpack and the folded letter in her pocket, feeling the crisp air against her face. For the first time in a long while, she felt steady. Her plan was clear. She would not act out of desperation. She would move carefully, respectfully. If what she had found was real, she needed to handle it the right way. The walk to the highway was long and cold. Her shoes were worn thin, and the uneven road cut into her soles. Still, she pressed on until she reached the main road and flagged down a passing pickup. The driver, an older man with a soft drawl, gave her a lift into Harlan. He said little, but his silence was kind. By the time she reached the small town, her body ached and her stomach growled. The town was quiet, framed by brick buildings and faded signs. Across from the Kentucky Theater, she saw a modest motel with a flickering vacancy sign. She stepped inside, her shoulders hunched from exhaustion. The woman behind the counter, Mrs. Whitlow, was in her 60s, with silver hair and glasses that hung on a chain. She looked up at Monique's swollen belly and tired eyes and asked gently, "You all right, honey?" Monique managed a nod. "Just need a room for a few nights. I don't have much money." Mrs. Whitlow studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Don't you worry about that. We'll figure something out." She adjusted the rate, cutting it in half without a word, and handed Monique the key. Later that evening, she knocked on the door again with a tray of soup and cornbread. "I made too much," she said casually, but the warmth in her eyes said otherwise. Monique thanked her, her voice breaking a little. That small kindness hit deeper than the woman could ever know. Over the next 2 days, Monique rested and gathered her thoughts. She had hidden the box in the cabin before leaving, carrying only a few coins and one old bill as samples. She needed to confirm they were genuine before daring to hope. From the public library, she found a contact for an antique coin and currency dealer in Lexington. It took nearly all her remaining money to get there, but she went anyway. The bus ride felt endless. Every bump in the road made her heart pound. When she arrived, the dealer, a man named Mr. Harlan, examined the items with quiet focus under a magnifying lamp. He looked up, surprised. "These are authentic," he said slowly. "Early 1900s. In this condition, each coin alone could be worth several $1,000s. Her heart skipped. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Positive. If there's more where this came from, you may be holding a fortune. But don't do anything rash. Get legal advice before you sell or move the rest." She thanked him, gripping her small purse tightly. The number he'd mentioned kept echoing in her mind, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Back at the motel, she sat by the window in silence for a long time. The street outside was nearly empty, just a few cars rolling by under the dim streetlights. She wasn't used to hope feeling so heavy. The next morning, she asked Mrs. Whitlow if she knew anyone trustworthy who could guide her. The older woman called her brother-in-law, a retired attorney in town. He met with Monique at the motel lobby, where she told him everything: the cabin, the box, the letter. He listened carefully, then said, "If this is true, you're not breaking any laws, as long as you report it properly and pay the required taxes. The property is legally yours, so the contents are, too." They agreed on a cautious plan. Monique returned to the cabin with him 2 days later to retrieve the box. Together, they documented the find, photographed every item, and placed the contents in secure bags. When the valuation was completed weeks later, the final estimate left her speechless, over $400,000 in total, between currency and gold. Her attorney helped her open a trust account. They filed the necessary tax paperwork, and she consulted with a financial advisor in Lexington who explained investment and budgeting options. Each decision felt like a test of her strength, how to manage such a gift without losing herself to greed or fear. She refused to take shortcuts. Every receipt was documented, every legal step followed. She told no one except those directly involved. The temptation to use it all at once tugged at her: new clothes, a car, comfort, but she reminded herself what the letter had said: "May it bring you peace." That night, sitting on the edge of the motel bed, she whispered to her unborn child, "We're safe now, but we'll do this right." Weeks later, when she finally signed the paperwork confirming her full ownership and clean financial standing, a quiet sense of dignity settled over her. She felt she had honored Harold Dunn's memory, the lonely miner who had hidden his hope beneath the floor. Before leaving Harlan, she returned to the cabin one last time. She cleaned it gently, brushing away dust and cobwebs, whispering her thanks again. The box's space under the floor now held a small wooden cross she had carved from a fallen branch, marked with the words, "Thank you for saving us." As she stood in the doorway, sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a soft glow across the room. The same place that had once filled her with dread now felt sacred. She touched her belly and smiled. "This is where everything changed," she murmured. She walked back to the road, heading toward her new beginning, unaware that her story had only just begun. By the time Monique reached Richmond, winter was creeping in. The trees were bare, and the streets smelled of rain and chimney smoke. She found a small, one-bedroom apartment above a bakery downtown. The space was modest, peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, but it had warmth, and for the first time in months, she had a real bed. She used a portion of her savings to furnish it with second-hand items: a crib, a dresser, a couch from a thrift store. Every purchase was careful, deliberate. She wasn't chasing luxury, she was building peace. Her neighbors quickly noticed her quiet nature and growing belly. Mrs. Lawson from next door knocked one afternoon with a bundle of baby blankets. "My daughter outgrew these years ago," she said. "You'll make better use of them." Another neighbor, a young mother named Keisha, offered to drive her to prenatal appointments. Soon, small acts of kindness began to form a safety net around her life. Each evening, she would sit by the window, touching her belly, whispering to her baby about the world they were about to enter. The fear that had once ruled her nights now gave way to calm determination. She was still alone, but no longer lonely. December arrived quietly. The city was covered in frost when Monique went into labor. She called an ambulance, gripping the folded letter from the miner in her hand. It had become her good luck charm. After hours of pain and trembling exhaustion, the cries of a newborn filled the hospital room. When the nurse placed the tiny baby girl in her arms, tears flowed freely. "Hope," she whispered. "Your name is Hope." In that moment, every cold night, every rejection, every mile she'd walked felt redeemed. Holding Hope, she promised that her daughter would never know the kind of hunger and fear she had endured. With her finances stable and her health improving, Monique began to think long-term. She enrolled in a local community college, using part of her money to cover tuition. Her goal was to study business and social work, to create a life where she could manage her blessings wisely and help others in need. Balancing motherhood and classes was harder than she expected. There were nights she fell asleep over her textbooks, Hope curled beside her. But she never gave up. One afternoon after class, her economics professor, Dr. Martinez, asked her to stay behind. "You've got a natural instinct for numbers," he said. "Ever thought about entrepreneurship?" She laughed softly. "I'm just trying to survive." He smiled. "Survival is the start of success. You've already proven you can rebuild from nothing." His encouragement became a turning point. He began mentoring her, teaching her about investment, budgeting, and how to turn an idea into a sustainable business. When she told him about the cabin, his response surprised her. "Don't sell it," he said. "That place gave you a miracle. You should keep it. Make it stand for something." The words stayed with her. Months later, when Hope was learning to crawl, Monique returned to Harlan to meet with her lawyer. She decided to buy the surrounding property, just a few acres of wooded land around the cabin. Her intention wasn't profit, it was preservation. She hired local contractors to help her restore the hut, working alongside them whenever she could. The process was slow but fulfilling. Rotten boards were replaced, the roof repaired, and the broken windows restored with clear panes that let in soft light. She kept the original floor where she had found the hidden box, leaving that space untouched as a quiet memorial. In one corner, she placed a small plaque with engraved words, "In memory of Harold Dunn, whose hidden hope gave life to another." The renovation drew attention from locals, many of whom had heard rumors about the cabin but never dared to approach it. Some came by to help with painting or to bring supplies. To their surprise, Monique welcomed them with gratitude, often saying, "This place gave me everything. It deserves care." When the project was done, the transformation was striking. What once looked broken now stood proud and simple, a restored wooden hut surrounded by wildflowers and trimmed grass. On a cool spring morning, she brought Hope to see it for the first time. The baby's laughter echoed through the air as Monique carried her inside. She sat on the floor near the very spot where her life had changed forever and whispered a prayer of thanks. That cabin had once been a symbol of fear and isolation, but now it was something far greater, a reminder that miracles often hide beneath broken places, waiting for courage to uncover them. As she watched her daughter crawl toward the sunlight spilling through the window, Monique realized she had done more than survive. She had rebuilt a legacy. 10 years later, the mountains looked gentler than Monique remembered. The same winding road that once felt endless now carried the hum of her car as she drove toward the cabin with Hope in the passenger seat. Her daughter, now 9, watched the trees blur past, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Is this where you found it, Mom?" she asked softly. Monique nodded. "Yes. This is where everything changed." The cabin came into view through the clearing, a small wooden structure standing tall and clean, sunlight glinting off the new windows. The once broken door was freshly painted white. Wildflowers surrounded the porch, swaying in the cool breeze. When they stepped out of the car, Hope ran ahead, her laughter echoing through the open air. Monique followed slowly, her heart heavy with gratitude. The sound of crunching leaves underfoot reminded her of that first terrifying night. The cold air, the shaking walls, the darkness that felt endless. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and varnish. The wooden cross she had left years ago still hung on the wall, now framed with care. Hope turned to her mother, puzzled. "Why did you make this place so special?" Monique took her daughter's hand and sat down on the old floorboards. "Because this house taught me that even fear can lead to blessings," she said quietly. "When I came here, I had nothing. I was alone, scared, and ready to give up. But this place gave me hope, literally." Hope frowned in confusion. "But how?" So Monique told her everything. She described the hunger, the cold nights sleeping in her car by the river, the rejections, the loneliness. She spoke of the storm that drove her to this mountain, the creaking floors, the whispers of the wind, the pounding in her chest as she opened that hidden box. Hope listened without interrupting, her small hand gripping her mother's tighter with every word. When Monique finished, she said softly, "You were so brave, Mom." Monique smiled faintly. "Maybe. But sometimes bravery just means not giving up, even when you want to." They walked outside together, standing under the trees. Monique pointed toward the hills. Every part of what happened was necessary. If those people hadn't turned me away, I wouldn't have come here. If I hadn't been afraid that night, I never would have lifted that floorboard. Even the terror had a purpose. It led me to discover what saved us. Hope looked up, thoughtful. And the man who left the gold. Monique nodded slowly. He was a miner. He lost everything in the Great Depression and hid his savings here, thinking no one would ever find it. He died alone, but what he left behind gave us a future. That's why I kept this place, to honor him too. Inside, a small plaque hung beside the cross. Hope read it aloud, in memory of Harold Dunn, whose hidden hope gave life to another. For a long moment, the two stood in silence. The wind rustled gently through the trees, carrying a kind of peace that words couldn't capture. As they left the cabin and sat on the porch steps, Monique continued, her voice low and steady. You know, the money helped me start over, but it wasn't the most important part. The people who helped me mattered just as much. The couple who gave me a ride, the woman at the motel who fed me, the neighbors who shared their kindness, my professor who believed in me, they were all pieces of the same miracle. Hope rested her head on her mother's shoulder. So the world's not all bad, hey? Monique smiled. No, baby. Sometimes it just hides the good in places you'd never expect. Years of hard work had turned that hidden fortune into something bigger than either of them could have imagined. Monique now ran a small but successful business in Richmond, a community program that helped single mothers find housing, education, and financial literacy training. Her experience became the blueprint for helping others escape the same cycle she once endured. Hope, bright and curious, had inherited her mother's drive. She excelled in school and loved visiting the cabin each summer, calling it their lucky place. As the sun began to set, Monique looked toward the horizon, her thoughts returning to that cold night years ago, the footsteps she heard, the fear that gripped her heart. What once haunted her now felt like guidance, as if something beyond her understanding had pushed her toward discovery. Even the fear had meaning, she whispered. If I hadn't been scared, I might have missed it all. Hope turned to her, puzzled. You're not scared of this place anymore. Monique shook her head. No. I learned that sometimes what we fear most hides the very thing meant to save us. The woods grew quiet as twilight deepened. Fireflies flickered around them, glowing softly. The cabin behind them stood still, a monument to survival, to faith, to the strange grace that can rise out of suffering. Monique placed her arm around Hope and said, "When life gets hard, remember this place. Remember that even broken things can hold something valuable. We just have to keep going until we find it." Hope smiled and whispered, "I will, Mom." As they walked back to the car, Monique turned one last time toward the cabin. The faint light from the window glowed warmly, like a promise. Her voice softened as she spoke to the quiet air. "Thank you for saving us." Years of struggle, fear, and faith had led her here, to peace, to purpose, to a life rebuilt from what was once ruin. She knew now that miracles rarely arrive in shining moments. Sometimes, they're hidden in the darkest corners, waiting for courage to uncover them. Before driving away, she looked at her daughter and said, "Our darkest nights don't destroy us, Hope. They guide us to who we're meant to be." The car rolled down the gravel road as the cabin faded from view, no longer a place of terror, but a symbol of transformation, standing quietly in the Kentucky hills, keeping the story of two souls whose broken paths had met in one miraculous night. Monique's story reminds us that hope can survive even our darkest nights. She proved that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. Every rejection she faced, every sleepless night in that broken cabin, became a stepping stone toward something greater. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Your support helps us keep sharing the kind of stories that remind us what strength, faith, and kindness can do. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what lesson from Monique's journey resonated most with you. Was it her courage to take one last chance, her honesty even in success, or the kindness of strangers that changed everything? Tomorrow brings another powerful story you won't want to miss. Thank you for being part of this community. Together, we're proving that compassion, resilience, and hope still matter in this world.